asking you a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you've come from, where you are now, and what you're doing, what you're up to.
So I'm a Londoner, born in North London, crossed the river to South London, and lived there with Rebecca, my wife, for 26 years. We brought up our children in London, and then as soon as they'd left and gone to university, we escaped to North Somerset. So now I still, in theory, practice law in London, but in reality I sit in my garden shed most of the time and do my work there.
And your speciality in law practice, what would that be?
So my speciality is banking law. So what I spend all my time doing is things to do with money. Either people who've made investments that have gone wrong, or people who have got indebted and cannot repay the debt. That's what I spend my time doing, which is one of the reasons I got really interested in what that might have as a connection to the Bible.
So you're from a Christian background, you have a live Christian faith, ongoing Christian faith, and part of that Christian faith journey is taking you to a college that we share in common, Spurgeon's College, and a theology degree. So just tell us a little bit about that, what your interest in theology is and what came from that.
So I went to the college I was at university. Half of the people were either doing medicine or sciences. And my Christian friends at university always said, we're going to heal people, we're going to make people better. You're going off to do law, you're just interested in making money, aren't you? And I think my whole adult life has been a quest to say, okay, well, what is it that lawyers do beyond just making money? And finding a framework for thinking that through. So I sort of worried away at that on my own, and then decided I'd go and have a look and see what some of the great thinkers in the church have said about that in the past. And I got particularly interested in somebody called Thomas Aquinas, who lived in the 13th century, and he was not a great walker. He called himself the dumb ox, and he was so fat that he had to have a semicircle cut out of his desk so he could sit and work. He was very, very sedentary, but he was an extraordinarily gifted man and thought about all sorts of subjects, including law and how law fits within God's purposes for society.
Perhaps if you'd had a garden shed to work in, they wouldn't have had to cut a hole out of his desk, because he would have had to walk back and forth with it. But we're very glad that you are down here now in Somerset and sharing some of this rich experience, both of your profession, which I think it wouldn't be too pushing the envelope too much to say it's a vocation. Would you say that is part of the driving force behind those who go into law? They really want to make a difference in terms of our social life, our cultural life, our legal structures.
So I think law, like medicine, like teaching, like anything that has the capacity to take up all of your time, needs to be a vocation if you're going to survive. And on a good day that means I can't think of anything else I'd rather do, and on a bad day I think it's the worst job apart from all the others I can think of doing instead. But yeah, the conclusion I came to was, in places where you don't have law, in places where you don't have a reliable system, then actually all sorts of possibilities that we take for granted don't happen. If your teenage daughter is going to get raped on the way to school and nothing is going to be done about that, well then she doesn't go to school anymore. And we know that countries where girls stop going to school have much, much worse outcomes in a whole series of areas. Yes. If you run a successful business and the local mafia are going to come in and take it away from you, if it's successful, well, don't try and run too successful a business. You don't want to draw attention from the local organised gangs. So again, why try too hard with business? So there are all sorts of ways that we don't really think of that people are just their behaviour if the reality is you're exposed to violence at any moment, and nothing will happen if there is violence.
Thank you for a very succinct summary of the importance of a law-abiding population, so that civilization can function and society can function, and we can go about our peaceful lives. And when law and order breaks down, then you've just described that scenario.
Yeah.
You've got, in one sense, then I can see a dual vocation, a bivocation, your Christian vocation and your professional vocation. Perhaps I'm compartmentalising it too much, but there'll be elements of your faith that come into your legal practice, and elements of your legal practice and thinking that shape your theology and what you're doing when you go into theological colleges and talking to students and ordinands about this aspect of your work. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that, about how your interest in, for example, in coming up with this book has come about?
Yeah, I find out what I think by writing. So if I have a question, I'll write. And then often I find that by the time I've looked at the question, I've ended up in all sorts of extraordinary places. There is everything from Bridgerton at one end of the scale through to the Church Fathers at the other end of the scale in that book. And once I've done that, I think, well, it would be quite a good idea to share this with other people so that they don't have to spend as long as I did looking for things. I'm an explainer. I like looking at questions that are tricky and explaining them.
So thank you. And this is the book. I know one member of Catholic Church here is reading it at the moment. Ransomed, Redeemed and Forgiven, Money and the Atonement. So do you want to just give us a little bit of a summary of this book in about 2 minutes? What a pressure, David. I mean, the headlines here are pretty chunky, aren't they? Ransom and the power of evil, redemption and the cost of salvation, forgiveness and the debt to God, the economy of resurrection. 2 minutes.
Well, let me do a politician's job. Can any of you think of a hymn or a line from a hymn or a song that uses words to do with forgiveness or debt or money or guilt?
Ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven.
Ransomed, healed, restored, forgiven. Yeah. You know, I sing songs. Yeah, I sing songs. Sorry.
Yeah, he forgave my sins in Jesus' name.
Yep.
Yeah. My chains fell off. My heart was free. That's the plumber's favourite hymn, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, we've got songs that sing my debt he paid, my death he died. There are all sorts of images, and those images that are in our hymns are there in the Bible. Jesus talked more about money than he talked about anything else, and he did that against a background where the dominant image used for sin at that time in Second Temple Judaism was debt. And actually in the German language today, the word Schuld means debt and it also means guilt. And the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. That's a perfectly proper translation and would probably have been what would have been heard by the people in Aramaic. So it's absolutely there, but as far as I can tell, nobody's written about it for about 300 years because the Puritans got their knickers in a twist about all of this. And then everybody else has sort of avoided it. So I thought, well, okay, because of my background in seeing what happens when people get indebted, let's have an explore of what this is like. And the more I looked at it, the more I realised we don't really get it. We might be about to get it because we are, for the last 15 years, discovering how indebted we are financially as a society. But if you go back to Charles Dickens' time, what happened if you got yourself into debt? Where did you end up? You ended up in the debtor's prison. The Fleet prison on Fleet Street would be where you would end up, and you would stay there until your family had earned enough to pay off the debt. And the debtor's prison was like a terrible version of Perrier Inn that you couldn't get out of until your family had paid off the debt, because you had to pay for all your food and your lodging while you were in debtor's prison. That sounds bizarre. And Dickens his father ended up in debtor's prison when he was 12, and Dickens had to stop his education and go out to work to earn the money to pay off his dad's debts. And that's why one of his major campaigns in his novels was to describe the conditions in debtor's prison.
This is the background of David Copperfield, of course, isn't it?
It's in David Copperfield, it's in Little Dorrit as well, it's in Barnaby Rudge, it's lampooned in Pickwick Papers.
Yes.
So, just so many times he comes back to this, sometimes humorously, sometimes just exposing all the sorts of issues. But we know today that it's still a major reason for marriage breakup, it's a major reason for suicide, and it's a big problem.
Thank you for that. That's very illuminating, and I like the comparison of debtor's prison to Premier Inn. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but fascinating.
A bad Premier Inn, I said. A bad version of Premier.
So you're drawing on. So your resources that you're drawing on. Yes, the Bible and presumably other literature. I don't know, the Talmud or other readings. Thomas Aquinas, early church fathers, Thomas Aquinas, Dickens, Bridgerton, and experiences from your own life. I'm just going to read the back of this. Using practical examples from his experience as a banking lawyer and from history, David McIlroy shows how power, money, and sin combine to trap us, leaving us in desperate need of a redeemer to rescue us. So, your experience as a banking lawyer, practical experience, are you able to give us one outstanding illustration from your own experience of what's shaped your thinking and how that's gone into this book? Story I'm after, David.
Yeah, so I think probably the story to tell has been the transforming power of interest-free loans. So we have an economy that is set up on the idea that if somebody lends you money, you have to pay it back at interest, and you have to pay it back at compound interest, interest on interest, which grows and grows and grows. One of the major ways we do that is a mortgage. You know what mortgage means?
Go on.
It's from the French. Mort meaning death, and gage meaning bet or wager. And in the medieval times, the mortgage was the pact you made with the devil, where you signed away your eternal soul in exchange for earthly wealth. It's very interesting. That's at the heart of our financial system, that mortgage.
I've often thought the heart of our financial system is a pact with the devil, but do carry on.
So when I went to study for my master's degree in France, my great uncle made me an interest-free loan. And off the back of that interest-free loan, I was able to go and study abroad for a year, which I wouldn't have been able to do. And then a few years later, my brother got himself into financial difficulty. And I remember sitting down with him with the spreadsheet to try and work out what was going on. And it was clear that he had enough to live on, but he had this weight of debt that he couldn't shift, and trying to even just service the interest on that was going to mean he was going to tip himself over and become more and more and more indebted month by month. So I was able to pay forward what my great uncle had done. I made my brother an interest-free loan, and that then just stabilised his finances and enabled him then to go on. Didn't have to sell his flat, was able to keep going. So I think the power of, we sometimes think our choices are kind of commercial loans or gifts, but actually the power within a community of interest-free loans.
And And do you see this then as a metaphor for the gospel, freeing people from something that they can't pay back themselves? They need something from. They need an act of grace from the outside to come into their lives and liberate them, free them from the prison of debt. Is that a metaphor that is applicable to your thinking?
It's absolutely got to be. So Jesus in Luke 4 does his Nazareth manifesto. This is the equivalent. The American presidents, they talk about what they're going to do in their first 100 days, don't they? The plan with the Prime Minister is that normally, under normal circumstances, you get about 100 days to do your programme before events, dear boy, kick in and divert you. Now, that's not currently what we're experiencing. But Jesus stands up in Nazareth in Luke 4 and says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to preach good news to the poor." And by that, his original hearers wouldn't have just thought of the spiritually poor, they'd have thought of the physically poor. And to proclaim freedom to the captives, freedom to the prisoners. And the prisoners are not criminals. If you were a criminal in Roman society, you got executed. The prisoners are the people who are indebted. And so it's absolutely there at the heart of what Jesus says he's doing. So we're picking up on a word picture he used that resonated in his context. And I think we miss it because we spiritualise it, or we think, prisoners are people who are on remand or whatever. It was money that's there.
Is that very? I'm thinking as you're speaking. We're going to have time in a minute or two for some conversation around the table. That the two versions of the Lord's Prayer that we have, Matthew. Blessed are the poor in spirit, but Luke, blessed are the poor. And he doesn't have the addition of the in spirit. So often we gravitate towards the Matthean version of the Lord's Prayer, blessed are the poor in spirit. Whereas what you're saying is there's a very grounded, down to earth, very real human application of the gospel, freeing people from a physical debt. And that's as strong a metaphor for redemption as you can find. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask you one last question.
I'll make one point just before I do it. So those 10,000 bags of gold that are in that passage we looked at, that was the annual tribute that Judea paid to Rome. That's how absurd the size of the debt is. The idea that one man could owe as much as the whole province of Judea owed the Roman Empire.
Thank you. And I'm sure there's going to be some very interesting conversations around the table. My mind's already springing off to how do you cancel third world debt? And that opens up a big conversation about how we might be not the white saviours, but we can certainly be instrumental in helping those who are indebted. The very last question for this section, and then we'll have a bit of time chatting around the table. The economy of resurrection. Very succinctly, your last chapter in this book. Could you summarise that last chapter?
So one of the criticisms of this sort of way of looking at the atonement is what difference does it make to us? Well, it might change our status, but how should it change how we are? So the last chapter I wanted to look at that. And so if you think that you have been forgiven, you need to forgive other people. That's what the Lord's Prayer says we have to do. And interestingly, in Matthew's version, immediately after Jesus has taught that, he comes back to it again and says, if you forgive, you will be forgiven. If you don't forgive, you won't be forgiven. Now that's a bit of Jesus' teaching we really do not like. So how do we do that? If you have been ransomed, well, you've been liberated. So what can you do to set other people free? If you have been redeemed, well, in the Bible story, you are redeemed by a kinsman. You're redeemed by somebody who makes you part of their family, that sense of family responsibility. Do you like the Book of Ruth? The Book of Ruth is there. It's not just financial transaction. It's relational. It's new family being created, and so all of those kinds of things are what I'm exploring.
Thank you.
And also, just gratitude, being thankful for all the things that we've been given.
You see this in the economy of resurrection. I love that phrase.
Yeah.
When I spent time down with the Franciscans, they would speak about the economy of grace. But this is actually part of that whole economy of God. Grace, forgiveness, resurrection, gratitude. It's all in there. Thank you for that. And it's all in this book, which is at a knockdown price today, just for you lovely people, if you'd like to buy it. I'm sure if you approach David afterwards. I'm just going to warn you now, our treasure is on that table, depending on which table you gravitate towards. And I'm going to say, so thank you ever so much, and we'll have a bit of time afterwards to share back. But at tables now for a top-up of anything from tea, coffee, cake, chat time around the table for about 12-15 minutes. And I'll put a lovely bit of capture and finishing. Thank you very much, David. I think a round of applause for that. Thank you. And do enjoy your time together.